Imagine uncovering the ultimate betrayal just hours before your wedding. What would you do? Charlotte had a choice: walk away quietly or turn the tables in a way no one would ever forget. If you were in her shoes, how would you handle it? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Trust me, it's one you won't want to miss. Hit that bell and get ready for another jaw-dropping tale of love, deception, and revenge. See you in the next one. Charlotte Reynolds had always believed in fairy tales. She had spent months planning the perfect wedding, the breathtaking venue, the elegant white roses, the custom-designed gown that fit her like a dream. Tomorrow, she was supposed to walk down the aisle and say, "I do" to the man she thought she would spend forever with. But fate had other plans. It was past midnight when she found herself wandering through her family's estate, unable to sleep. The mansion was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of the trees outside and the distant hum of the city lights in the distance. Excitement, nerves, and the weight of forever all tangled inside her, making it impossible to close her eyes. She had everything a girl could dream of: a loving family, a successful future, and a fiancé who had promised her the world. Or so she thought. As she made her way to the grand terrace, she heard the faint sound of laughter. At first, it was nothing unusual. After all, her fiancé, Ethan Brooks, had invited a few of his closest friends to stay over before the big day. But then, she heard something that made her blood run cold. "Charlotte is just a stepping stone," Ethan's voice rang out, casual and cocky, carrying through the still night air. "Once her father is out of the picture, the company will be mine." Charlotte froze, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Had she misheard? Maybe she was imagining things. But then, Ethan spoke again, his tone dripping with arrogance. "She's completely in love with me. By this time tomorrow, I'll be married into one of the most powerful families in the country. And when the time is right, I'll take over Reynolds Enterprises. It's only a matter of time." A chorus of laughter followed, his friends egging him on, congratulating him like he had just won a prize. Charlotte's breath hitched. The world she had built in her mind, the love, the future, the dreams, shattered in an instant. Every whispered promise, every gentle touch, every time he had looked at her like she was his world, it had all been a lie. He had never loved her. He had only loved the power, the status, and the wealth that came with her last name. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as the truth settled in. Ethan wasn't just using her. He was waiting for her father, James Reynolds, to be out of the picture. What did that even mean? Was he just waiting for him to retire, or was it something worse? She felt sick. Carefully, she stepped back, retreating into the shadows before she could be seen. Her mind raced, trying to process the betrayal, but one thing was clear: this wedding could not go on as planned. But calling it off wasn't enough. Ethan thought he had already won, that she was blindly walking into his carefully laid trap. He had underestimated her. Charlotte wasn't just a helpless bride-to-be. And tomorrow, Ethan Brooks would learn exactly who he was dealing with. Charlotte barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, Ethan's voice echoed in her mind: "Charlotte is just a stepping stone." The words cut through her like a blade, sharper than any heartbreak she had ever imagined. But she wasn't broken. No, she was burning with something far stronger than pain: determination. By the time the sun rose over the Reynolds estate, she had made her decision. Calling off the wedding in silence would be too easy. Ethan had played his game so well, believing he had already won. But Charlotte wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. If he wanted a wedding, he was going to get one, just not the one he expected. She met her father, James Reynolds, in his study that morning. He was already awake, as if he had been waiting for her. When she played the recording, his expression remained unreadable, but she could see the cold fury simmering beneath the surface. "We go ahead with the wedding," he said simply. Charlotte's breath caught. "Dad, I can't." "You won't be marrying him," James interrupted, his voice steady, firm. "But you will be walking down that aisle. And when you do, we'll make sure every single person in that room sees him for who he truly is." A slow realization spread through her. He wasn't suggesting they ignore the betrayal. He was suggesting something far more powerful: a public reckoning. By the time guests began arriving, the stage was set. Charlotte was calm, poised, her expression unreadable as stylists fussed over her in the bridal suite. The gown, once a symbol of love and a new beginning, now felt like armor. She stared at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. This wasn't a bride in love. This was a woman on a mission. Lena, her best friend, entered the room, her eyes filled with knowing concern. "Are you sure about this?" Charlotte nodded once. "More than ever." Downstairs, Ethan greeted guests with his usual charm, laughing and shaking hands, oblivious to the storm brewing just behind the perfectly curated wedding decorations. He had no idea that today wasn't the beginning of his empire. It was the end of it. As Charlotte stepped into the grand hall, her father by her side, every pair of eyes turned to her. She walked with grace, her head high, her hands steady. At the altar, Ethan smiled, confident, smug. He had no idea. The officiant's voice filled the room. "Do you, Ethan Brooks, take Charlotte Reynolds to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Ethan answered, his voice smooth, certain. The officiant turned to her. "And do you, Charlotte Reynolds, take Ethan Brooks?" She smiled. But instead of answering, she turned to the crowd, her voice strong, steady. "Before I say my vows, I think everyone here deserves to hear something first." She reached into the folds of her gown and pressed play. Ethan's voice, his own damning words, filled the hall. "Charlotte is just a stepping stone. Once her father is out of the picture, the company will be mine." Gasps erupted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Ethan's face drained of color. Charlotte turned back to him, her voice cold, cutting. "You already said I do. But the only thing you ever committed to was a lie." And with that, she slipped the engagement ring off her finger and let it fall to the floor. The sharp clink echoed in the stunned silence. Ethan Brooks had walked into this wedding believing he had won. But now, in front of everyone he had wanted to impress, he had lost everything. The silence in the grand hall was suffocating. The moment Charlotte pressed play, everything changed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Ethan's own voice betrayed him, his arrogance, his greed, his true intentions laid bare for all to hear. "Charlotte is just a stepping stone. Once her father is out of the picture, the company will be mine." Charlotte had expected shock, maybe even disbelief, but nothing could have prepared her for the pure disgust that settled over the room. Guests turned to each other, whispering in hushed, horrified tones. Some shook their heads, while others stared at Ethan like he was a stranger, like they had never truly known him at all. Ethan stood frozen at the altar, his usually composed face pale, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like he might crack a tooth. His hands trembled at his sides as if he was trying to come up with an excuse, a way out, a way to spin this. Charlotte didn't give him the chance. "You already said everything that matters, Ethan," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the whispers like a blade. He finally turned to her, eyes wide, desperate. "Charlotte, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she interrupted, her tone sharp enough to slice through his weak defense. "I almost married a man who never loved me. A man who only loved power. A man who thought he could lie his way into my family's empire." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Charlotte's father, James Reynolds, stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his presence alone carried enough weight to make Ethan flinch. "You thought you were playing a game," James said, his voice calm yet deadly. "But let me tell you something about business, Ethan. A man who cannot be trusted is a man who will never hold power." Ethan flinched as if the words had physically hit him. Around the room, the whispers turned into something else, realization. Business partners, investors, and industry leaders who had once considered Ethan a rising star were now reassessing everything. One of James's oldest business associates, an influential investor, cleared his throat. "Ethan, I had considered partnering with you in future ventures," he said, his tone filled with cold finality. "But now that I see your true character, I can't risk aligning with someone so reckless." Other murmurs of agreement followed. One by one, the people Ethan had spent years trying to impress began turning their backs on him. Ethan's panic was visible now. His breathing was shallow, his hands clenched into fists. He turned to his family, his last hope. "Dad," he pleaded. His father, William Brooks, had remained seated this whole time, his expression unreadable. But now, as Ethan desperately sought his support, he simply shook his head. Then, without a word, he rose from his seat and walked out of the venue, his wife following closely behind. Ethan's face fell. His own family had just abandoned him. Charlotte watched the realization hit him. The man who had walked into this wedding believing he was moments away from securing everything, power, wealth, a future at the top, had lost it all in an instant. Desperation flickered in his eyes as he turned back to Charlotte. "Please," he said, his voice quieter now, almost broken. "We can fix this." She met his gaze with unshaken resolve. "No, Ethan. You did this to yourself." And with that, she turned her back on him, walking down the aisle, this time, not toward a life of deception, but toward the future she truly deserved. Charlotte had expected Ethan to disappear after the wedding disaster. She thought that, after losing everything, his reputation, his business connections, and even his own family, he would finally understand that the game was over. But people like Ethan didn't just walk away. It started with the messages. At first, they were short, vague attempts at communication. "We need to talk. You don't understand the full story. Please, just meet me once." Charlotte ignored them all. There was nothing left to say. Then came the phone calls. Unknown numbers. Late-night voicemails. She never answered, but she listened to one, just one, to hear what he had to say. His voice was different now. It lacked the arrogance, the smooth confidence he had once worn like a second skin. Now, he just sounded desperate. Charlotte, please. I messed up, okay? But you didn't have to destroy me. You didn't have to make everyone turn against me. You got what you wanted. Just meet me. One last time. She deleted the voicemail without hesitation. But Ethan wasn't done. 3 days after the wedding, he showed up at her father's office. He wasn't invited, and he certainly wasn't welcome, but somehow, he had managed to talk his way past security. By the time Charlotte arrived, her father was sitting calmly behind his desk, arms crossed, while Ethan stood on the opposite side, looking like a man on the verge of losing his last shred of sanity. The moment she walked in, Ethan's eyes snapped to her. Charlotte, he breathed, relief flooding his face. Finally. She kept her expression cold. You're not supposed to be here. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, I got that impression when security tried to drag me out. He turned back to her father. James, tell her. Tell her that she doesn't have to do this. That she doesn't have to ruin me. James leaned forward, clasping his hands together. Ethan, you ruined yourself the moment you chose deception over honesty. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? You think I don't regret what I did? His gaze shifted back to Charlotte, his desperation bleeding through his words. I just need you to hear me out. She tilted her head, studying him. You had plenty of time to be honest, Ethan. You chose not to. And now you have to live with the consequences. His hands curled into fists. So that's it? You get to humiliate me in front of everyone and then just walk away. Charlotte exhaled, her patience thinning. I didn't humiliate you. You did that. All I did was let the truth speak for itself. Ethan's face twisted, frustration and anger warring behind his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might lash out, say something cruel, something to claw back any ounce of control. But then, something shifted. His shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. And for the first time since this all began, Ethan Brooks looked defeated. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you ever love me? Charlotte hesitated for only a second. I loved the person I thought you were, she said softly. But that person never existed. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. When he opened them again, there was nothing left, no schemes, no manipulations. Just a man who had lost everything. Goodbye, Ethan, she said, turning to leave. And this time, he didn't try to stop her. As Charlotte stepped out of her father's office, leaving Ethan behind for good, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, peace. No more mind games. No more whispered lies. No more pretending. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest since the night before the wedding was finally gone. But she knew Ethan wouldn't disappear quietly. For days after their final confrontation, she kept a close eye on everything, news articles, social media, whispers from mutual acquaintances. Ethan had gone silent. No public statements. No desperate attempts to salvage his reputation. No sign of him at all. But that didn't mean he wasn't planning something. Then, one evening, as she sat in her study reviewing documents for her father's company, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Charlotte. She recognized the voice instantly. Ethan. Her grip tightened around the phone, but her voice remained calm. What do you want? A deep breath. You made your point. You got what you wanted. She let out a humorless laugh. What I wanted? Ethan, the only thing I ever wanted was honesty. But you threw that away the moment you decided I was just a stepping stone. Silence. Then, softer, almost broken. You ruined me. No, Ethan, she corrected. You ruined yourself. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. Did you ever love me? Charlotte sighed, her fingers drumming against the desk. I loved the version of you that I thought was real. But that person never existed, did he? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. She exhaled slowly. This is the last time we talk. I'm moving on. And you should too. Before he could say another word, she hung up. And just like that, it was over. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Charlotte's window, casting a golden glow across her room. For the first time in what felt like forever, she woke up without a lingering sense of dread. No more waiting for the next lie, the next betrayal. Just freedom. Downstairs, her father was already in his study, sipping coffee as he reviewed documents. He looked up as she entered, a knowing glint in his eyes. You seem different, he observed. She smiled. I think I finally am. He gestured for her to sit. So, what's next? Charlotte had spent so much time reacting, countering Ethan's plans, handling the fallout, making sure nothing he did could touch her again. But now, for the first time, she had the chance to be proactive. To take control of her own future. She met her father's gaze with quiet confidence. I want to take a more active role in the company. His brows lifted slightly, intrigued. Oh? For too long, I let others decide my future. I thought I was making my own choices, but I was just following a script that wasn't mine. I want to change that. A slow smile spread across his face. He nodded. Then we start today. A spark of excitement ignited in her chest. This was it. Not just reclaiming her life, but shaping it. That evening, she met Lena for dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The sky was painted in deep violet and amber, the world below buzzing with life. Lena leaned back in her chair, sipping her drink. So, CEO in training. How's it feel? Charlotte laughed, shaking her head. A little terrifying. A little thrilling. Lena grinned. That sounds about right. They clinked glasses, a silent toast to new beginnings. As the city lights flickered to life, Charlotte realized something. Ethan's deception, his ambitions, his downfall, none of it mattered anymore. Because she had won. Not just against him, but against the doubts that had once held her back. Lena studied her curiously. If you could go back, before all of this, before the wedding, before you knew the truth, would you change anything? Charlotte thought about it. About the love she had once believed in. About the pain of betrayal. About the strength she had found in its wake. And she smiled. No, she said. Because then I wouldn't be who I am now. Lena smirked. You really are the main character, huh? Charlotte laughed, the sound light and real. Yeah, she admitted. And for the first time, I'm writing my own story. The city stretched before her, endless in its possibilities. And she was finally ready to step into the life that was always meant to be hers. Wow, what a roller coaster of a story. Can you imagine being in Charlotte's shoes? Finding out the person you were about to marry was only using you for power and money? And then, instead of quietly walking away, turning the tables in the most unforgettable way? If this were you, what would you have done? Would you have exposed Ethan like Charlotte did, or would you have handled it differently? Maybe you have your own experience with betrayal. If you're comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Also, where are you watching from? I love seeing how many people from different parts of the world connect through these stories. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you love this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell because tomorrow's story is even crazier. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.